So we're moving into our second portion of this particular lecture, and when we're going to talk about, continuing to talk about religious experience for sure, but also trying to understand exactly what that means to our religion, what that means to our spiritual practices, and kind of how that is expressed, as well as looking at some scholarly approaches to what it means to deal with the experience of faith. So you may hear a little bit of my son practicing his cello in the background. If you can, we're just going to assume that that's some background music. If not, then I just get to enjoy it while he's playing. So once again, this is Religion, RELG 267. We're looking at our second lecture into what a religious experience is kind of all about. So one's experience with God may be a gradual sense of awareness in which the experience grows very continuously throughout the lives of individuals. So religious experience is not a one-time thing. You may have a religious experience, but the experience of religion, if we say it that way, is actually something that can last for your whole life. It can be something that is expressed through your habits, through your ability to express who you believe God is, and your continued growth in your ideas about religion and your adherence to religion. So you may believe something and not necessarily practice it. You may practice something and not necessarily believe in it. But this is something that is a long journey. So we talk about being on a spiritual journey or a faith journey. One of the things we're talking about is the idea that this will be something that you engage in forever. Again, you may have a religious experience, but a religious experience is different than the experience of religion or the experience of faith that happens throughout your whole life and gives you identity and grows your personality and your character. So all those things can be put together with it, but it's not just one simple thing. Over to the next point. Or that experience may be a sudden change or a new sense of awareness or a particular experience where no growth was seen, or a particular experience wherein each experience contributed to growth and a sense of the presence of God. Let me say this in a little more simple way. We may have moments in our experience of faith where there is a big jump or a surge, where something really means something and there is a significant change. So while it may be a change of accretion, a slow gathering of levels and levels and levels of religious experience and the experience of religion, or it might be a sudden shock to the system. For instance, every once in a while, I'll preach a sermon and someone will come up and say, wow, that sermon that you preached a few weeks ago, that changed my life, or a month ago, or 10 years ago, got me thinking about things very differently. Now, I don't expect that every time I go in to preach. You certainly hope for it, but every once in a while it will hit someone that way, or a song may hit you, or again, I go back to sunrise and sunsets. Every once in a while, these things may hit us in a way that is so profound. Now, normally, that's because we've been thinking about this for a while. It's normally not out of the blue, but every once in a while, it comes from just sort of a great increase that we don't 100% expect. I'm changing my ISO a little bit because that seems a little bit much. That's a little dark. I'm just playing with this now. I apologize. I'll make this make sense. Anyway, so continuing on, religious experience is often perceived in relationships and in contact with others, objects, persons, or places. So for me, growing up, I got a chance to grow up in Jerusalem. Every summer, we would spend our summers there. So Jerusalem has a pretty significant place for me in as far as meaning goes in my religious experience. I got to go back there this summer with my family and to walk with them through those same streets that I walked through when I was 8 and 9 years old with my father. Made a big difference, and it reminded me of certain things that were really important to me when it came to this experience of faith. And so relationships make a big difference. In fact, they say that your mother's faith is probably the most important thing that you'll have an ability to experience and will affect your own experience of faith, then your father's faith, then your grandparents' faith, interestingly enough. And then here's what's very interesting. If you went to a religious school, a week of prayer or a time of kind of focused spiritual intention, those make a big difference as well in your spiritual walk. So relationships, objects, person, or places, those things can make a significant difference as well. It is often seen in the interaction between and among one's belief, facts, or content, one's feelings about those facts and understanding of God, and most frequently eventuates in a response to this interaction in some way. Often positive action is the result. So again, there's this accretion, this layering of meaning and thought and intention over your spirituality. And then you may take a big jump. I had a friend who went to Guitar Institute in LA. He wanted to be a rock guitarist, rock bassist, actually. He ended up being a full-time comedian, which he does full-time now, and you've seen him on certain things. But I remember when he went there and he was practicing these scales that they gave him for 6 solid months. And I said, hey man, how are you experiencing this? Do you feel like this is a really good, good? And he's like, dude, I've been doing these scales forever, and I don't think they're ever kicking in. He's like, I'm not getting any better. I've just been doing these for months and months and months. A few weeks later, he called me back and he said, man, it all just kicked in. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, everything I've been practicing finally kicked in. I was performing this one song they wanted us to perform, and all of a sudden I could do things I couldn't have done before because I understood the background. I understood the philosophy behind it, and now my fingers could do it as well. Such is the same with our religious experience, that at times we will take these big jumps because we have been thinking about it and it all kind of culminates together. Now, Walter Hewson Clark, who is a psychologist of religion, he argued that there are 3 types of different religious experience. So there's this primary religious experience. This is the encounter that you have with God, that you begin to conform your life to that particular call. And then there's secondly a secondary religious experience, which he calls it's the primary experience plus the habitual religious life. So that first experience of God pushes you towards living your life a little bit differently. And then habitually, you're bringing in this concept of faith into your life. And habitually, your life forms around that, which is very important. And then thirdly, he calls it tertiary religious experience, which is really there's no primary experience and there's only habit. So it seems like what we're looking for with this particular gentleman's models is that you want to have a secondary experience, which is this primary experience and the habitual life of faith. Now, some of you, certainly all of us, have gotten our faith from our parents. And when we get our faith from our parents, sometimes we do all the habits of faith. If we grow up in a religious society, a religious community, we have all the habits of faith, but not that primary experience of faith that really changes the way we think about faith. So sometimes we've got this tertiary religious experience, which is kind of external, right? We do it, but it doesn't really mean anything to us. And that's pretty common among young people growing up in faith and in church. What you need to have is that primary religious experience where all of a sudden it means something to you. It could be a ton of different things. People have religious experiences over lots of different things. But let's use a good example for someone who went to one of our academies, Bible camp, junior, senior Bible camp. I got to speak there many years running. And that has a tendency to be this incredible religious experience for so many different people that it really changed their lives. And it's the first time they've had that primary religious experience. So things are changing. And then those habits that they've been living because they grew up in a religious community, all of a sudden were inhabited with meaning. And because they now have meaning, and because it's part of the practice of life, you've got this really wonderful kind of secondary religious experience. But where before that you had kind of a tertiary or an external religious experience. And we want you to move into both of those things, but you need to have that primary one. Now, Paul Tillich, who was a theologian at the University of Chicago, he lived until about 1965, and he believed religious experience could be demonstrated using concentric circles. And so this is what he looked at. So I'm going to use my cursor here. It begins with a recognition that there is something that is wholly other than us. It's bigger than us, it's grander than us, it's more powerful than us, and it's worth worshiping as well. Outside of that comes the idea of prayer. Your family is centered around that, and church becomes part of that. And then we realize that it also affects our friendships, the nature that we exist within. And then we move it out, and then it also affects our stamp collecting, right? Our Angels baseball watching. Like, religious experience is woven throughout every single one of these circles. Now, he's certainly not the only one who thought about this. Also, Robert Thaulis, he wrote a couple different books. He lived until 1984, but he basically describes flaws in reasoning and argument. He was a lecturer in psychology at the University of Manchester, Glasgow, and reader in educational psychology, a fellow of Corpus Christi College in the University of Cambridge. And he argued that religious experience could be seen best in looking at the foci, or the focus of that particular experience. So is it a sense of morality, a sense of beauty? Is it intelligence, input of the family? Like, are they building in your religious experience? Your understanding of culture, is your culture deeply, deeply rooted in a faith tradition? I think of an Irish Catholic family, or an Italian Catholic family, or an Indian family that grew up Hindu and that's very deeply rooted, or perhaps a Chinese family in Buddhism. Lots of different connections there. He basically says this is the way that it breaks up. His model of religious experience is basically, right, family 24%, culture, it looks like would be 18%, sense of beauty being about 29%, sense of morality 9%, which you kind of wish was a little bit more than that, right? And then, of course, your sense of morality, your intelligence being around 21%. Just a different model of looking at it. And then Sir Alister Hardy, he explored religious experience for over 60 years. He was very interested in this. He analyzed 49 different types of experience. But the main thing that he saw was that you would sense this bit of God's presence. And if you've ever been to church and you have a powerful worship experience, someone will say this, can you sense the Holy Spirit here? Can you sense God here right now? He's singing with us. The angels are singing with us. Things like that. Those kind of ideas. Sometimes they express themselves in even to hysteric paralysis. Like, things can get kind of crazy, can get kind of weird. While at the same time, the idea is that you sense this God's presence. Now, the model for our discussion this quarter, our class definition or model of religious experience, has three major sections, each describing one aspect of one's religious experience. So let me just break it up for you this way. First, our response in our religious experience, the content or facts of our religious experience, and our feelings about this religious experience. So let me just break it down for you. We're studying the book of Romans. That's the content or facts of our religious experience. We're trying to give a broad base and a deep well for you to experience God. Then secondly, how you respond to that is really important as well. Your response, that's part of your religious experience. And then how you feel about what Paul is saying in the book of Romans and what it means about God. So these three things come together for us. And we don't want to make this too long, but we also want to know that religious experience hopefully believes to healthy religion. And there's some things to think about. And some of you may have grown up in a very healthy religious household. Some of you may have grown up in a very unhealthy religious household, or been part of a religious tradition that has a tendency to be healthy, or some religious traditions which have a tendency to be unhealthy. And just for the record, they all can be kind of either or both and sometimes. So let's just look through these lists real quick, because this portion is getting a little long. I don't want to last too long. So how can we distinguish healthy religion from unhealthy religion? Are there any simple tests? So we've come up with 4 tests of a healthy religion. So one question alone is not sufficient to answer the question, is my religion good for my health? If your religion is truly good, it should pass all 4 tests. And the 4 tests are pretty simple. Here's what they are right here, and then we'll stop. First, does my religion give me a sense of freedom and self-acceptance? So is it something that's positive for you, gives you that idea of freedom or bondage? Or again, religion comes from that word religare, which means to bind to something, but that binding should be to a sense of freedom and a sense of self-acceptance. So it makes you feel better about yourself. Secondly, does my religion make me more loving to other people, especially those with whom I may disagree? So is there compassion and benevolence that happens through your religious experience and through your religion? Does my religion make me more tolerant of different beliefs and backgrounds and lifestyle? If you become more and more rigid, is your religion very healthy? Or is it a religion that has a tendency to be very defensive? So, and we'll talk more about these things later. And fourth, does my religion make me more willing to share my resources with others and make the world a better place? So again, this concept of compassion. And we'll talk about a continuum of compassion later on. But these 4 things. So I want you to ask yourself these 2 questions, because I'm going to give you questions at the end of each one of these. Number 1, is my religion that I've practiced in my life healthy or unhealthy? And number two, what do I need to do to get my religion either more healthy or healthy in general? So again, is the religion that I've been involved in healthy or unhealthy? And what can I do to make it either more healthy or to move from unhealth to health? Those are the two questions. Thank you guys for watching.